Welcome to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast series with U.S. Navy Special Operations veteran, CEO, and hockey fanatic Bob Pizzini. Bob discusses leadership, success, failure, defining moments, and hard lessons learned with guests who are intentional in their approach to leadership. Leadership is a perishable skill. Use it or lose it. In this series, entrepreneurs, industry executives, academics, public figures, and other highly effective professionals share their formulas for success with you.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Elevate Your Leadership podcast with me, your host, Bob Pizzini. Hopefully, you've listened to the show many times by now. I think I've got about 60 episodes. I get about one episode a month or so out. And the reason is I only create an episode when I have guests who I think are going to bring great value to you. And the reason I think that is because I know them, I've spoken to them, and they've already brought great value to me. Today's guests, plural, are two unique gentlemen that I've had the pleasure of knowing for about 4 years now. I met them initially through our neighborhood, and then we found out immediately that we have hockey in common. And then shared military. Back then, they were both on active duty, and now they are both very recently retired. I'm talking about Matt Suyderhoud. Say hello, Matt.
Hello, glad to be here. Thanks, boss.
Awesome. And his twin brother, Hans Suyderhoud. Say hello, Hansi.
Hey, everyone. Nice to be here.
So, yes, twins, F-18 fighter pilots, and you probably fly other things as well. They're both commercial pilots now, but anyway, we talk about all kinds of crazy stuff at the weekend gatherings, and sometimes they're pretty, I would say, valuable discussions that would be of interest to other people, military and non-military. And so this past weekend, Hans was sharing some writing that he did. He wrote extensively about how the automatic water dispenser and soap dispenser in bathrooms can really jack you up from time to time, and I'll let you delve into that, when we get to that. But that led to a broader discussion of the U.S. military and why we think that the military has become less elite over the years, and that's really the theme of the discussion today. Has the U.S. military become less elite, and what's happening with the new administration to reverse that downward trend, that trend that reduces combat effectiveness, the trend that reduces morale, the trend that reduces culture, the trend that has decimated recruiting, as we've seen, and hopefully is this recruiting trend being reversed, and are things going in the right direction. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Hans to begin with. Hans, you want to make any opening remarks?
I'd just like to say that if anyone doesn't like what we have to say here and they want to egg your house, that we're neighbors. So just in the name of green efficiency, they can egg our houses as well, since we're right down the street.
That's very egalitarian of you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to save the planet.
Yeah. Well, I was really glad to be here, and I think it's an awesome opportunity to sort of bounce some ideas off of each other and see if they stick with the wider audience. But being able to finally formally sort of record our conversations, sometimes fueled by wine and beer, that help solve the world's problems, is this is a good opportunity, now fueled by a lot of coffee. So
this morning fueled by coffee, so a different type of discussion, but
a little more jittery this time.
But one that's going to be I would say just as beneficial to anybody listening. Okay, and the other part of this is, once again, folks, you know that I'm coming to you from the broadcast studio at iFly Virginia Beach, down here at the oceanfront in Virginia Beach, Virginia. iFly overlooks the oceanfront. We're on the third floor. We have a beautiful boardroom. Next to the boardroom is my studio. And the point of all that is we do military training on a regular basis within my facility. At the same time, I hear F-18s buzz my building all day, every day, and I know both of you guys are guilty of that.
We're sorry about that.
Yeah.
I'm not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
But the reason I bring that up is we do have perspective that is of value. I'm in constant contact with folks on active duty. Matt and Hansi are very recently retired, and certainly in touch with people on active duty as well. So with that, let's get into it. We're talking about a less elite military. Hans, why don't you open it up and tell us why you think, or do you think, that we have a less elite military than when?
Well, so I think you can describe it as a kind of a wet blanket, a malaise that is trapping our military currently from becoming or continuing to be the elite warfighting group that it used to be. And when I say used to be, I don't necessarily have a definite date on that, but I think, we have overlap of service between, Bob, myself, and Maddie. And we could probably talk about, we could lay it out linearly and talk about when we started to see things shift. And for me, I can go back to when the difference between flight school when I was a student and the difference between flight school when I was an instructor as one of the biggest turning points that I can see, where I saw the growing administrative bloat that was capturing the military and really hampering its progress. When I was a flight school student, the grade sheets were very short. They were very simple, and you always knew that you were a few flights away. You could be 2 flights away from failing out of the program, number one. And it was on you to prove that you belonged there.
And when were you in flight school?
This was 2006 through 2009, because the fighter pilot program is a pretty lengthy program.
Okay, all right, so about 3 years, all in Pensacola?
Nope, Pensacola, and then Whiting Field, so also Pensacola.
We did a lot of skydiving at Whiting.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a pretty cool place.
Yeah, it's a cool place. A lot of bugs though. But
a lot of bugs and a lot of airplanes flying around. Yeah.
And then Matt and I went both to Kingsville, Texas, and then we went to F-18 training in Lemoore, California. We went back to incidentally. We went back to be instructors in the same squadrons in Kingsville, Texas, that we were students at.
Okay. So that was the training you went through then, and you're contrasting that against what?
Well, it's just it's an example of the metastasizing bureaucracy, the administrivia that has captured our military culture. Like I said, it was very simple as a flight student. You knew that you were there to prove yourself, and you were 2 flights away from being gone. The grade sheets were short, and you were relying on the expertise of your instructors to assess whether you belonged in their culture.
Is he telling the truth, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was, we obviously studied together, flew together, and when we were students, you had this just perpetual feeling that I need to earn my spot here, and it was from the uniforms where we didn't get the same boots as the instructors to we didn't get to have call signs on our helmets or anything like that. No, there's some
just rites of passage.
For
that's
sure.
part of the culture stuff, but it was. So if you fast forward to the difference between what it was like when we were students and what we were like when we were instructors, was the attitude that the change happened when the grade sheets changed. The grade sheets changed from very simple, not a lot of data. It was just whether this person can continue, really, and some comments to amplify and verify that analysis, to just these really, really long grade sheets with multiple different matrices.
What drove that change?
Check. They wanted more data as to why we were attriting people or why we were keeping people.
Okay.
And how students were
why
doing.
People fail out. When he says attrite,
which is
why people fail out or why people pass.
Correct. And this is I think what makes this such a great example is that the data trend is so huge, not just in the military, but
it's everything.
Society.
Yes, we do it here.
Everything.
We do it at iFly. Why did somebody not hit the buy button?
It's everything, but data doesn't necessarily capture the whole story, and so we would spend way more time filling out these grade sheets as instructors. It became even harder to kick a student out, even if every instructor that flew with them knew this kid is not going to make it. They're unsafe. They don't belong. We got to get them out. You had to prove through your grade sheets and documentation that you needed to get them out. So the trust of the experts was not lost. It just wasn't even a factor.
Yeah, it was weighted a lot less.
So and through that you lose cultural touch points and stuff. the students then, like, they were being brought up to a level where they were almost like, it was also almost coincident with the instructor as far as their status within the military. So, you couldn't kick them out. They were getting the same boots as the instructor, same color boots. They were getting call signs, and they could design their own helmets.
Let's talk
all
about
these
call
type of
signs
things.
real quick.
So,
Matt, what's your call sign?
It's Dickens.
Okay, and I knew that. And Hansi, what's your call sign?
my call sign's Manila Ice. I had a big night in the Philippines. Those records are sealed, though.
Yes, of course they are. Yeah. So we got Dickens and Manila Ice, which is pretty cool. Reference to Manila in the Philippines, and of course there's a large military footprint there. Used to be much larger, but there's still some military there. Let me, in a case we didn't say this, not only are Matt and Hansi brothers, they're twins. I don't know if we said that earlier or not, but
It's real hard to tell us apart.
Yeah.
Just by our voices.
yeah. So anyway, that's a little bit of background. Okay. So did you see this in the fleet, Matt? Did you see pilots, when you're making your 300 carrier takeoffs and landings, did you see a degradation in capability?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you have students that are getting through, right, then they're eventually getting to the fleet. And the problem is, for better or worse, and in this case, I think worse, the people that were the students eventually become the instructors.
Same thing in Navy diving.
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
an instructor at Navy dive school.
And you have the students that grew up in a different culture where they maybe didn't have to earn their spot as much. They show up to the fleet and they don't have the attitude of, I need to be a sponge and learn everything from these holders. And I'm not saying that's everybody. It was a certain percentage of it, but as that certain percentage continues on in the military, becomes the teachers, they now teach that attitude, and it becomes this this
negative
ice
cascading.
Exactly, and it just
Yeah.
keeps growing.
Yeah.
And I saw that certainly in the fleet, and I think this sort of dovetails. Like, there's a lot of aspects to this, right? Like, we had students that you couldn't kick out, where we tried to kick them out.
Foreign students?
All different types. It was everybody.
Also,
Even
We couldn't kick foreign students out of dive school.
we had that problem as well. So
Yeah.
we had some foreign students that we were told, irrespective of how poorly they are doing, you will get them through. Which,
Yeah.
like, your worry becomes
made
like,
for some interesting flights. That's for
yeah,
sure.
you're certainly on your toes a lot. But your worry is that this person is going to kill themselves and others that are supposedly on the good guys,
Yeah.
and it becomes certainly a tactical problem for down the road. But when you get these, we tried to kick out students, and we thought we had all the paperwork done that was asked to do, that Hans mentioned earlier, and then they get kicked back to us and say, no, you didn't. This grade sheet, one in particular, didn't have the right documentation. You didn't, this maneuver you said he wasn't good at, and like, well, what's one maneuver in one flight? Just because he nailed that one doesn't mean this guy is good, guy or gal for that matter, is good enough to go to the fleet. But they sent him back, and then we finished that person and passed the trash. And I'm not saying he's a human being, he or she. They're not trash as a human being. They're just not a good pilot.
Yeah.
And in the end, you're endangering people. You're endangering that pilot's life. And you're endangering the people that are working on the boat, on the ship.
Everybody in and around that aircraft.
And I think,
sure.
and I think you get to the fleet, and you add all of those difficulties, and then you make it even harder to remove those people once they get to the fleet, because at this point the Navy has invested millions and millions of dollars in these people, and rightfully they want to get a return on their investment. But it is nigh on impossible to remove that person without them having a near death or deadly experience where we either lose men and women and equipment, or the jet, or a life, and that, like, it is such a difficult thing to get a person FNAB'd as that process. So when you Fleet Naval Aviator Review Board or Evaluation Board, and that process is very administratively heavy as well. And you're just trying to remove this person from flying jets off an aircraft carrier.
So I'd say that the problem, the reason we bring up the aviation example.
Yeah, because it's going to be, because I can tell you when I was an instructor at Navy dive school, of course, this was many years before you guys were instructors, but a similar process was taking place I mean, we had students come in and say they quit, and
Someone
times we had to
coax
try
them
and
back in.
talk them back into it. I mean, it was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. The dude said he quit. You know, this is a high risk environment. The dude's not comfortable. He said he quit. Why would we try and talk him back into it? But
So yeah, and this is our example, your example. They're all microcosms for the greater problem that's facing the military right now, which is a over reliance on administration. And I think what drove that was we haven't for a very long time, especially since the end of the Cold War, we've not faced a near peer threat, right? We've had significant threats, and that's not to minimize the threat of terrorism, Islamic extremism, or anything like that.
20 years of war.
Yeah, I mean, we've fought some very bloody battles. That's not minimizing, but on the scale of near peer, it doesn't match, right?
What do you mean near peer?
So near peer would be China, Russia, Iran. So commensurate military capabilities that could give our military a run for their money, right?
Yeah.
And so without
a worthy
that
opponent.
without that significant threat, the effectiveness of leaders and their initiatives has not been measured in their tactical effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And their warfighting capability. It's become more of a managerial model.
Mm-hmm.
And
Totally.
so what that allows
Collision at sea, right? We had, what was that, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Collision at sea.
We've had multiple.
So, yeah, there's been multiple, exactly. Recently, I think it was the Truman, the carrier Truman, and in every case, the CO is relieved. But a collision at sea, you would think, how could that possibly happen?
Well, I mean, if you looked at the reports, it was a lot of managerial stuff that wasn't focused on actual competency, right? And warfighter competency,
like driving a ship,
right? Yeah. So what's driving that is that we are so focused on administrivia that warfighting capability becomes a secondary job, which is absolutely bonkers to say. But I think if you talk to almost every operator in the military, they would say that they spend probably less time on their tactical proficiency of their main warfighting specialty, far less than they should.
I'll give you a great example of that. When I was a operations officer as a department head, so middle management of your unit for an F-18 squadron, my job was to make sure that our squadron was ready for deployment, and I was in charge of this massive matrix. This wasn't just an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that showed the matrix of all the different tactical qualifications that every pilot in our squadron had to have. This thing was, like a 3 by 4 feet piece of paper, laminated up on the wall in 10 font, that you have to follow and make sure that we are current and greened up, as they say, on every one of every pilot has to be, or a certain percentage of the pilots have to be current and greened up on this in order to be ready, quote, ready to deploy. Now, if you had asked me, hey Matt, what's your feeling on this squadron? Are we ready to go? Like we had a very good squadron, very competent junior officers, and I could tell you, yeah, hey, we're ready to go. But my job was to make sure we were ready to go as far as this somewhat arbitrary admin matrix, this massive matrix that had all sorts of maneuvers that we knew we were never going to actually use,
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
right?
They weren't complex enough that we couldn't do that.
It's like applying for a permit to build something in the city of Virginia Beach.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I've done several times.
So you seem to have some experience with this.
Yeah.
And I had this like moment of revelation where I'm just sitting there staring at this thing and thinking, like trying to figure out how in the next month or two I was going to get our squadron greened up so that we could report we are totally green and ready for deployment. Even though I knew we were already ready for deployment. And I had this revelation. I was like, I am actively contributing to my own personal lack of tactical proficiency. I'm making myself worse because I'm spending so much time worrying about this giant, somewhat arbitrary matrix that I am sitting in the books going through tactics, chair flying, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, or the cockpit. Is that chair flying? Cockpit.
Chair flying, like sitting here thinking about
Rehearsal,
flying,
yeah.
right? Rehearsal
or
and stuff
sitting
like
in
that.
the cockpit.
But every
exactly.
service member,
rounds. We call it rounds on target.
Yeah.
You can simulate. You can do all kinds of computer-based training, but nothing is going to replace putting rounds on target or going downrange and identifying an IED, or dealing with whatever the explosive.
Are you
hazard
sure
is.
that the information assurance training that takes like 4 hours for us to do that's not making us
Oh,
more
that's
tact-
also intellectually insulting.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's not
You're
making
not,
us
you're saying
tactically
that's
proficient?
doesn't provide any value?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing, the crazy thing, well, the funny, crazy, I don't know, depressing thing is that, what Maddie just talked about, filling in those trackers is a story that almost every service member of any leadership level can identify with. And it's this unquenchable thirst for data that has grown this administrative bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Monster. It's a monster.
It's a monster. Yeah,
It must be
it's
fed.
just constantly
Part of that is contractors selling their programs too.
that too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like the crazy thing is that we've gotten to a point where bureaucracy is now driving operations as opposed to supporting it. So we've had a complete inversion of priorities. Bureaucracy used to support operations because you could staff stuff, and
Mhm.
you obviously had to track some matrix or some variables because you needed to know the ins and outs of supply chains and stuff like that, and qualifications. Sure, but when that gets too great, you increase the administrative burden, and just like Maddie said, you decrease the tactical proficiency. And that was written about long ago. I want to say it was like 2015, but I could be wrong on that. But there's an Army War College paper that documented this, and they talked about the expanding administrative requirements on each unit, and they really laid it out great. But it basically said that the administrative requirements on each unit are so great that each unit lacks the number of minutes, hours in a day,
For
days
sure.
in a week,
For sure.
and weeks in a month, months in a year to complete all the administrative requirements. And so what they're going to do is they're either going to overburden their people, which leads to tired and disconnected people because they're sitting there working trackers,
Burned out.
burned
out, reduction in capability overall.
And
Before
also
you
they
even go on
don't-
deployment.
Yeah.
Also, they get fatter because they don't work out, right?
Yeah.
Which we can get to that in a second. But
Yeah.
or they're gonna lie on the trackers,
Yeah.
or they're gonna do both. And the crazy thing is that most everybody understands that trackers are just kind of BS. Like, oh yeah, that data it could be accurate.
Yeah.
We don't know, but you still send them up, and then like, well, why isn't this green? And then people up higher want call down to the lower echelon units. Why isn't this green? And you're like, does it even matter?
Yeah. No, before I went to Iraq, I had like 25 computer-based courses I had to do. Some of them I would say were of great value, and others were of no value.
Mm-hmm.
And then, everything in between, great value and no value. But it took a lot of time. It was an admin burden for sure, and I much rather would have been putting rounds on target.
Yeah, and I've had this argument with people before where you talk about if you just want to go, pure budget. The budget of the military is absolutely enormous, right?
Yeah. Trillion.
But
Going to be a trillion this year.
yeah, trillion. Yeah, but and so if you say like, why are we wasting our time on this silly computer-based training that no one takes seriously and they just try and click through it? Someone will say, well, that's just pennies on the dollar. It's a drop in the bucket. And my answer to that is, well, number one, like it's a different, okay, if you want to say it's a different pile of money, well, that money all comes from one pile originally, and that's the taxpayer.
It's nebulous, though. Nobody care if you're
understands
an
that,
admiral
but,
or
like,
general or secretary of defense. I think Trump's the only one who really understands
Yeah.
what a budget looks like.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But like those are drops in a bucket, but drops equal a bucket
Yeah.
at some point, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're having when you're fully funding this stupid online training that wastes everybody's time, and that everybody just like, the standard is like, oh, just if.
Yeah,
like,
you just click through it. Yeah.
Like some of my younger enlisted people.
You're watching the hockey highlights when you click through.
Some of my younger enlisted people would be like,
by the way, these guys are both excellent hockey players.
Mediocre. I was mediocre pilot. I was mediocre hockey player.
What a great guy.
You talk to some of these young enlisted people and you get the truth out of them sometimes.
Yeah.
They'll be like, oh yeah, we just get we give our sign-ins to the youngest guy in the shop and we make him do all the training.
Yeah.
Because it's that worthless.
Yeah.
And instead of recognizing that worthlessness and getting rid of it, we're continuing to fund those initiatives. At least we were.
And we build on them. We get more every year.
Yeah.
And like
more and more. And
then you get anecdotal, you get anecdotes from your friends and they're like, oh yeah, we punched out the door on deployment. And when we did our final training exercise, maybe you've experienced this, we didn't get to shoot 9mm. We had to choose between 9mm and 5.56 to shoot because we didn't have the funding for both. That is crazy.
Unforgivable.
It is unforgivable.
Totally.
And that is another example of the inversion of
in EOD, here's an example of that in EOD. We have our diving apparatus called Mark 16. It's anti-ferrous, non-magnetic, completely silent recirculating breather, recirculating rebreather, and the purpose of
Underwater Ninja.
Yeah,
that's how I picture that. Okay.
But the purpose of the rig is so we can search for, locate, and disable underwater mines. Mines that are hundreds of pounds of explosives that are designed to sink ships, aircraft carriers, etc. And so that diving apparatus is a complex machine unto itself. Now you take 6 or 8 people around what we call a dive station, and we're going to perform this diving operation. There's a symmetry, there's a balance, there's a choreography. Everybody has to do their part, kind of like landing a F-18 on an aircraft carrier. Everybody's role is critical to the safety of the operation, and we used to go down early in my career. Units would fly down to Key West, and they would do a 2-week Mark 16 dive supervisor course because you have very clear water, you have very favorable weather conditions, you can get deep, but some of the other risky elements aren't there, and it was just critical training. Well, over time, Key West, boondoggle. I know you fighter jocks go down and you boondoggle in Key West.
No good deals.
That's right. So boondoggle means good deal, right? We're not really training, we're having fun, but actually it's the opposite. We're really training and having fun if the situation allows.
Yeah, we should not be ashamed of being able to do both.
That's right.
There's nothing wrong with that. True. It's actually really good for a unit to create. I'm sure we'll talk about this later.
Yeah.
Create culture by doing both training and having fun together.
Yeah.
Turns out that actually is super healthy for a unit. But
and I'll digress real quick. Susan Kilrain, who's an astronaut, she piloted the Space Shuttle Columbia. She found out she was selected to be an astronaut while doing her fighter training in Key West.
That's awesome.
Yes, awesome. So what did she say? She bought the bar that night.
Perfect. Yeah, good for her, as she should. That's fantastic.
So we had a training incident here in Virginia Beach, I want to say like 2012, maybe 2013, where a young EOD technician died. He drowned just off the coast here doing a training evolution, diving that Mark 16 apparatus. And in the after action, in the incident study report, what do you call it again? The accident investigation. Mm-hmm. One of the items that was discovered was the level of supervisory training is inadequate, because somebody decided we're going to save money and not go to Key West and do this detailed, very concentrated, very focused level of supervisory training. So that's now back. Again, this is years ago, but that course is back. But that's kind of, an example of, I think, what you're talking about.
I bet I could tell you what was fully funded that year.
Yeah, right.
You're on your stupid online training.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's probably a new version of it too.
Yeah.
And when you juxtapose that to the fact that when I was in Oceania, they've probably fixed this before, but we were right next door to each other in the hangar, and our hangar, if there was significant thunderstorms, everybody had to put trash bags over their computers because the ceiling would leak because the roof was leaking.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And
the barracks aren't adequate for the junior sailors.
Yeah, but we're fully funding these other initiatives. And the problem with that is that you are actively messaging to people a couple of different they're subtle, but they're they're received very clearly. And the message is, we think you're kind of dumb based on these intellectually insulting trainings, right? We think you're all the same and that you're all kind of dumb. And we also don't think you're worth our effort to give you good facilities. So those are
good training, good facilities, good
those
equipment.
Those are very damaging messages to send to an all-volunteer force.
Oh, well, it will destroy what we talked about earlier. It'll destroy culture. So these are your observations, or these are discussions you've had with other teammates? I mean,
all of the above. I mean, yeah, we've talked about this for years. I think.
But that destroys culture within a unit. When I was a young Navy diver, young EOD technician, I love showing up for work every day, because if we're not downrange doing the mission, we're training for the mission. And I'm sure it's the same in aviation.
It was.
And, who doesn't love to go blow stuff up? Who doesn't love to go diving? Who doesn't love to go parachuting and jump out of all kinds of different types of airplanes? Never jumped out of an F-18. Boy, would that be cool.
It turns out it's not that cool. Yeah, it's actually really bad.
It's a really bad day. Things have gone. Mistakes were made.
But you go from that, like, I love going to work every day, I love working with my teammates, to, first 4 hours today is going to be an admin drill, or we got to do all this this paperwork that may be necessary in some capacity, in some regard, but a lot of guys just don't get it, and I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, so
we're going to go to the range today. But no, you're not without your 30 hours of computer-based training.
So I was the executive officer for the naval bases on the island of Okinawa for my last tour. Tremendously rewarding experience. I learned so much. But what was crazy to me was the amount of effort that had to be made to get the largest constituency of workers that I had were my MAs. And for the audience that is not in the military, not in the Navy, MAs are our military police that guard the bases, right? They only got to shoot their service weapons a few times a year. We were working actively to increase that, but the fact that we had to, the primary focus of their training was training towards it was called CART-FEP. It was this verification for certification of the base protection.
CART, so C-A-R-T, and that stands for something I can't remember what.
I can't. Final evaluation.
That's FEP, final evaluation program or problem. Yeah, that's FEP.
But it was a script, I would watch these guys train to a script as opposed to any sort of dynamic scenario where we're teaching.
Where they're thinking on their own.
And what was so troubling was that, I would walk into their spaces, and these poor kids were just not super happy. And they're living in one of the most beautiful places on earth. If you've never been to Okinawa, I recommend it. It's cheap and it's just stunningly gorgeous.
Yeah. I've got some time there.
Yeah, you and I both. Yeah, and we've. It's such an amazing place, but you walk into the office and these kids are stuck on their phones or stuck on a computer. They're not talking to each other, and their training is inadequate, and it's not gravity producing for their lives, right? So what I mean by that is, like, we're actively eroding any type of unit cohesion through administrivia, and we're driving this train.
Administrivia, a technical term, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. It's a term I made up, I think. Yeah. But
it's like a sickness. Administritis.
Yeah, administritis. It's an illness. But
it's like a red tape bazooka.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so you walk in and it's this distinct, what it ends up producing is this distinct lack of culture. at best, people are kind of indifferent about going to work. Everybody's sitting on their phones. They're not talking to each other. Well, why is that? Well, it's partly because of phones and social media, right? But it's not entirely it. When you have an office that is almost entirely focused on unmeaningful training and then documenting of that unmeaningful training, they're going to be stuck on computers. They're going to lack those touch points and the esprit de corps driving mechanisms.
Big time. Let me just tell you.
Well, why did we the question is, why did we all join?
Why didn't we just go to Initech?
Yeah,
it's because
space.
we all we wanted to serve our country and we wanted to become elite
and see the world.
And
right?
see the world.
And that overseas experience is huge. I was stationed in Italy, 1993 to 96. This is like midway through that tour is when laptops became a thing, but internet wasn't a thing. But laptops started to become a thing. But I didn't even have a telephone at my super cool house in Italy for the first 2 years that I lived there. And to your point, especially when you're overseas, the unit cohesion is so much tighter.
Huge.
Because,
it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and it is. And this happened in Italy and it happened in Guam as well. But we would get together on the weekends. We would go tour. We would go to Agrigento. We would go to Palermo. We went to midnight mass at the Vatican. We were tourists and sightseers and adventurers off duty. And thank goodness we didn't have all this connectivity, because that would have stifled us, which is kind of what you're talking about.
Well, so yeah, what I'm saying is that what we're creating for these young people who joined for kind of the adventure of their lives. I guess you can kind of encapsulate it in that, right? That's the kind of the mentality.
Yeah, most of them. I mean, in the last under the Biden administration, they're joining to get sex change operations.
Well, yeah,
so
that's part of it.
And a steady paycheck too. Yeah, I think
but the ideal candidate joins for the reasons that you just mentioned.
The adventure of their life. Yeah.
Unfortunately, due to the theme of this whole thing, the kind of the reduction of the eliteness, a lot of waivers are granted, and a lot of people are joining who really have no business being in the United States military.
Yeah, right. And I would say where we used to, as a military, we would get some of those people. Maybe they were fringe, and you'd coach it out. You would break them down and rebuild them in the mold of the soldier, sailor, airman, marine, coastie that we wanted you to be.
Don't forget Space Force.
Space Force, yeah. I apologize.
Space. Do you call them Spaceys? What are they called?
Spaceys? Yeah, great question. I don't want to insult any of our Spaceys out there, but they're very well, very needed.
Wonder if they have a cadet program.
Go ahead, call in. The lines are open. You can tighten us up here, but you were able to, if we got someone who was on the fringe there, if they failed and they weren't able to rise to that standard that we created, we were able to remove that person and send them on their way into a civilian career.
Yeah. Reconstruct or remove.
Exactly. And then if we did, they would adapt and they would become part of that culture. They would adapt into that culture, and we would make them elite because we were an elite force. But now, because of all the administrivia, because the administritis, because we can't kick anybody out because of all the documentation required, because there's no nuance in any of that, we just bring in all these people. So, and that maybe, just like you said, don't belong in this system or aren't molded into belonging and to being an important cog of the system. But additionally, we also push people that are probably pretty elite away from we're not getting these former college athletes because they look at this and go why would I want to do that?
Because
for sure.
It's because all we offer now is the hardship without the cultural reward that reinforces the deep meaning of people's life. So and this is, so let's break it down to just a baseline military unit. We don't even need to define it. Baseline military unit. How would you structure the ideal day for this baseline military unit to get a really cohesive team? You would have combat training and you would have fitness, right? The two things that can really bind people together. Why? Because it's shared and voluntary exposure to hardship and challenge within a unit. So you're working to prove yourself in a friendly, competitive atmosphere. We are also working to further the effectiveness of your team in an orientation that is aimed at a greater good.
Yeah,
right?
Ethos. You're supporting ethos there.
Yes, but we don't do any Can you think of when you left? EOD is probably a little bit different for baseline military units nowadays, and I can tell you because I've been in them.
Are you saying you're basic?
Yes, I'm super basic. You can tell by my Lululemon shirt. But that program barely exists anymore. And to the extent that it does, the combat training and the fitness are all addendums or add-ons to the day that is oriented around getting paperwork done.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so
Say that again. Say that. Repeat that.
So those two things, fitness and combat training,
Combat readiness.
training.
Yeah, physical fitness and combat readiness are
especially
addendums
to the day,
to the administrative day.
To the administrative day. Not always, but that is a pervasive type of theme, and it's especially true with fitness. If you go onto any base, look at the weights and the body structures of all our service members.
When I came in 1984, you could be obese and be in the Navy, and probably 3, 4, 5 years into my my first tour, my enlistment, the Navy said, height weight standards were now 100% enforced, and there was no more obesity. And again, I was in kind of a special operating unit throughout my whole career, so I saw this stuff a bit from a distance. But I still saw it. I saw the difference. I saw the change. And now when I go on base, it seems like I'm seeing it go in the opposite direction.
Well, but the crazy thing is that we know through science, everybody trust the science. We know that physical fitness is one of the primary drivers of a healthy mind.
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah. But
without a doubt.
My whole this is a great segue to me plugging Elevate Your Leadership. So folks at home, I've developed a program to develop leaders and teams, and the discussion and the application of physical fitness is a big part of it. The program is called Elevate Your Leadership. I actually wrote a book, and part 2 of this book is all about the health and wellness and how we use physical fitness. And I've been in the private sector now for 15 years, unbelievable. Own my own business. I'm in my 11th year, and physical fitness is a key component I use within this private sector organization to drive positive culture, to drive, obviously, health and wellness, but ultimately to drive profitability, to drive ROI. And I'm telling you, I know this works from 26 years in the military, and I know it works from 11 years now owning my own business. So Elevate Your Leadership. You can find greater detail at robertpizzini.com, where you can, number one, you can buy the book, which is available on Amazon,
Buy the book.
Barnes & Noble. And there's going to be, you'll see a book commercial in the podcast anyway, but it's real. So
it's a real thing.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but I really did mean to interrupt.
It was an appropriate time to interrupt.
Yeah. But fitness as a component of culture and as a component of readiness.
It's such a huge driver. But
even you can even be if you just want to look at it from the bean counter, return on investment. If you have a healthy, fit force, you're not going to be spending as much money on a bunch of medical problems and then all the other stuff that comes along with being fat, depressed, all of those things that come. If you're just talking about return on investment, it's so much better to be fit. Not to mention the fact that in order to fight a war, you probably want to be pretty physically fit. Yeah, at least more physically fit than the enemy.
And it's not just that; it allows social interaction that creates the proper culture. People get to know each other, they get to trust each other, and then they can more easily hold each other to standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
If everybody's just sitting there on their computer or sitting on their phone, they're not developing personal relationships. And when you don't develop personal relationships, especially in a very sensitive culture that we have, which is probably another 2-hour conversation in and of itself. But when you don't develop those touch points, then you have a force that is at best just not really knowing their shipmate.
Yeah, which is terrible because, the core values I have in this business are loyalty, integrity, and professionalism. Mm-hmm. And the breakdown of those is simple. And I got this from my time in the Navy. Everybody's number one priority is the unit, or in this case, the business. Anything you do or say should be in the best interest of the business. That's number one. Number two, anything you do or say should be in the best interest of your teammates. And so lifting each other up and we all need a lift from time to time.
Sure.
Everybody does. Lifting your teammates up when they need that lift is critical to any organization, civilian or military. Helping your teammates out and then calling your teammates out in a way that's productive, not destructive, right? Like, hey man, let me help you with that. Hey man, are you sure we should be doing that? Hey man, are you sure we want to be out this late? Whatever the occasion is, we want to lift each other up. We want to help each other out. And we want to call each other out in a way that drives success.
But the problem, right, that we face, and I think in the broader military, is that while we do have some of that, we don't have enough. It's always a problem of degrees, right? Like, yeah, you spend enough time with people and you have enough history behind you, which the military does. You're going to have some of that, the leftover culture that is going to kind of sustain a little bit, but we don't have enough of it. Is what I think we're driving at, and what we have now, and I think Matt and I talked about this, and I think he referenced it in one of his talks that he gave for Elevate Your Leadership.
That's right. Matt's a guest speaker in Elevate Your Leadership.
How about it? Yeah, that was a great opportunity. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Hey, real quick.
He speaks for both.
Yeah.
Way better.
Well, no, I got to say, I know Hansi has fed a lot of the content. I know that thread. But real quick, let's talk about.
He's my ghostwriter.
Let's talk about just real quick your discussion that you share with the people who attend Elevate Your Leadership, because it's relative to this discussion, which is why you brought it up.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So most of my discussion and when I talk at Elevate Your Leadership is about culture, and this is where we've sort of beat around the bush. We've mentioned it a few times specifically, but culture, I think that's like my little baby, right? I think culture is more important than almost anything else when it comes to unit cohesion and thus unit performance. I would always rather hire for personality and train for skill than hire someone who is super, super talented and then have to hopefully get that person to buy into the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the guests at one of the times when I spoke with Elevate Your Leadership, he put it very succinctly. He said, if you hire for skill, you will eventually fire for personality.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like super profound. It was a great, it was at the end of my little spiel.
Yeah,
and,
guilty as charged within this organization.
Yeah, it's that's a lesson sometimes best learned the hard way, I guess. But when I was on the Blue Angels, probably the most important thing about that place was the culture that it perpetuated every year. And you have to be able to have a super tight functional culture within an organization like that, because it's so dynamic. You take an air show, incredibly complex air show, and you have to move it around the country every weekend. And the public expects the same great product every day, irrespective of weather, irrespective of like that mountain that's right behind the airfield. Like, how are we going to maneuver around that thing? Like, that's right in the way. Like, we still have to make it all make it all
skyscrapers.
Skyscraper, yeah, flying through Chicago, yeah, that was incredible. But we have to be able to take this massively complex machine, and when I say machine, I'm speaking not just of the aircraft, but the larger Blue Angel team. The everything that goes along with these jets and putting those jets out in front of people, and we got to move it around the country every weekend and make the same great product. That doesn't happen unless everybody on that team is bought into the mission, and the mission, the team and its mission are more important than the individual. And I think right now, as not just as a larger society, although the military is a reflection of larger society in a lot of ways, I think the problem that we're seeing right now is that the individual,
the machine is more important.
The individual is not getting inoculated to the culture and brought into a positive culture where the mission and the unit is the important thing. And just like Hansi said, the machine that we're feeding that needs all this data is more important than anything else. The data, the administration, all these things, all these requirements is the most important thing. And we need to do that over every other goal: combat readiness, unit cohesion, personal happiness, personal fitness, all of those things. And that just erodes not only does it erode performance, but all the ripple effects that we mentioned. You reduce recruiting. We don't get the right people
Retention,
in general.
People
you
get
don't
out.
keep the right
Great
people.
Get out.
Yeah.
Quick story there. I think I was with you guys actually. We were at New Realm. New Realm, an awesome brew pub in our neighborhood, by the way. Free. That's your only free one, New Realm. You're going to have to sponsor after that. But it's an awesome place, beautiful outdoor beer garden, and we go up there from time to time. And
your kids can run around like crazy out there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. And we were all sitting at the picnic table outside. I was talking to this E4. He was 24 or 25 years old, helicopter mechanic. I don't know if you guys remember this or not. Awesome guy, super motivated, loved his job as a helicopter mechanic and wanted to stay in, but couldn't wait to get out because unit cohesion, he didn't have faith and he didn't have confidence in his leadership. His division officer, a man, wore earrings or something to that effect, or would show up with mascara.
What?
And yeah, we are, I mean, the most competent, skilled, motivated person, the people we need to stay in, and they're being chased out. Continue.
Well, so this is something that Maddie and I think you and I discussed this as well, probably in one of our mini solving the world's problems through drinking beers nights. But was it New Realm? Was it New Realm? It's probably New Realm. You're welcome, New Realm. That's two. But we talked about what creates culture, and to me, and I think we kind of stumbled upon this, and this might be an oversimplification, but to me, culture is the combination of rules and values. And the rules kind of get you into the ballpark of how you're supposed to conduct yourself. And they're kind of like the skeleton of the body of culture, right? They're rigid, and they're at best they're neutral. At worst, they're kind of parasitic because they demand adherence, but they don't necessarily give you any feedback, right? And the way I look at it is like people will bend to the rules when they have to, and they will bend the rules when they can, right? Values, on the other hand, are offer feedback, and people will if you instill the right values in people, people will rise and sacrifice of themselves to meet values, right? And then they get the feedback to their souls, if you will,
For sure.
For meeting that requirement.
Yeah.
Like, when you sacrifice for values, you feel better about yourself.
Yeah.
When you sacrifice for rules, you're just kind of like, these rules are annoying.
Yeah.
And it's so it doesn't offer you that.
Well, it's a choice.
Feedback.
When you choose to adhere to a culture, that is a choice, and when it's a positive culture, it becomes this empowering choice.
Yeah,
and now
it
you
empowers you.
And you feed that. You become part of the development
it's a feedback
and
loop.
the maintenance.
It's a positive feedback loop. Yeah. But because of the amount of administrivia that we have, not all, but like so much of what we have now is just rules. And we don't have time to create the value. We don't have time, touch points, focus, energy, whatever, to create values that help to create the proper culture. And when you have that type of kind of negative culture, you're going to get a lot of people that rise into leadership. Like the people that rise into leadership are the people that stuck around. And I say that partially like I'm nailing myself here because like I stuck around, right?
Yeah.
So there's, but a lot of times you get like
I've seen all 360 degrees of that. It's true for sure.
The best people are going to lead.
That's right.
And
That's
then
absolutely right.
what you're stuck with is, hopefully I would qualify as one of the random like good ones that stuck around. I don't know. It's over to the people that I led. But what you get
it's
is
up to
a
your
lot.
teammates.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's up to your teammates.
What you get a lot of is you get managers, and managing is important for overall leadership. But you have to to be an effective leader. You have to have vision and managerial skills.
Yeah. Well, you're breaking into the age-old dichotomy of leadership versus management, which I write about extensively, folks, in Elevate Your Leadership.
Take a look, everybody.
Buy the book.
It's so simple because when you manage processes, you manage things, you manage a budget, you manage the campaign, you manage a schedule, but you lead people.
Mm-hmm.
People are human beings.
Through vision.
Through a whole bunch of things. Vision is the key component. So again in the book, but the leaders should have. You should identify your leadership styles that are critical to your personality and who you are and how you want to do things. Vision is the one that's common across the board. Every leader should have a very clear vision and communicate that vision often.
You have to tell the story of where you want to take the ship.
Yep. Cardinal direction.
Yeah, but what we have now is we just have a bunch of managers, and we also, within that like culture, if you want to call it that, we have mechanisms that are pulling even leadership, like we're pulling leadership decisions out of the hands of leaders.
Yeah.
And we're giving them over to systems of adjudication. So a lot of discipline, especially the and this is a touchy subject, but I watched it happen in units that I was a part of, where like sexual harassment or other bad behavior within a unit was such a hot button issue that anytime someone made a claim, it was now put forth to a process that was taken outside of the leadership's hands and put up to the next echelon. And so now you just have, like, you enable managers / leaders to not have to lead. You're just saying, you don't have to make the decision, put it over to a system.
Yeah.
And that is a very, very damaging trend to create for leaders, because
you're taking their power.
You're taking
away.
their power away,
Yeah.
and like you're also allowing bad leaders to abdicate their responsibility.
For sure.
You're giving them that opportunity,
Yep.
which is a really, really scary precedence to set.
Yeah. And again, we're talking about United States military operations. It's one thing to have that situation in a manufacturing facility or a shipping facility, one of the big, the Costco or the Home Depot, but it's completely different when you are in foreign lands, in dangerous areas, or just on the deck of an aircraft carrier, the most dangerous environment in the world on a daily basis. I would say that obviously areas in Afghanistan and Iraq were equally or even more dangerous.
Handling live bombs, like
all
that's
that.
pretty
Every
pretty
single
dangerous.
bit of that.
So, the scary thing is that it's not just about taking leadership opportunities away from leaders or allowing them to abdicate their responsibility. You're also giving young people who, the new recruits and everything like that, who young people within the units who are green at life.
Mm-hmm.
They're who are trying to figure out how to navigate themselves as adults.
For sure.
And
that's one reason a lot of people join. They know that. And again, guilty as charged. I knew I needed better direction in my life as a young man. And I love diving, all things diving. And those two things, it's like, it's a no-brainer. I'm joining the military.
Yeah. But part of growing up as a young adult is making mistakes, social mistakes, especially within the work environment, because you start to understand your left and right lateral limits, and then people
with good leaders, leaders guide you through that process, which I had. As a
what was
young
this
man.
the spearfishing
the
anecdote?
spearfishing story?
Buy the book.
It's in the book. I had a good leader who really could have made things painful for me, but instead he put me on a road to recovery. That's just the best example of leadership that I could ever think of.
And
that's also in my public speaking talk. I just want to plug that out.
When those leaders, create that culture, then it's not just them, right? It's the people that they've taught and the culture that they've created will help fix problems at the lowest level. But when you don't create those cultures and then you allow systems to permeate where they take away adjudication of bad behavior away from peers and lower level leaders, what it allows is multiple. What it causes is multiple different things. One, it allows for bad actors to abuse a process offensively. Two, it allows for hypersensitive people to remain hypersensitive and also cause everybody else to walk on eggshells because they're afraid because they're afraid that they're going to offend somebody and then they're going to have to go through this effing process.
You might commit a microaggression.
Yeah, and then
you
have these young people, the well-intentioned young people who need to grow up and learn how to act as adults, but you're not requiring them to handle their own business.
Yeah.
So like if they make a social
adult
faux pas,
things.
suddenly suddenly it's some sort of form of harassment, or and it goes to a disciplinary process, as opposed to one of their peers or someone just above them going, "Hey, that's not how we act. Knock it off."
Yeah, exactly.
And then correcting that behavior there, and then they learn, and then there's a forgiveness process within that. There's a grace that's allowed within
Rehabilitation.
that process. There's a rehabilitation,
You
as
just get
opposed
smacked
to
in the side of the head, and then they pick you up and dust you off and give you a hug.
Yeah,
and
you're
say,
still
get out
ours.
there and do it again.
you're an idiot, but you're our idiot.
That's
So
right.
like, let's go.
That's right.
But we have a lot less of that now, and I think that is that's a symptom as well as a cause of the bad culture.
I'm telling you, bold leadership is. I was so fortunate to experience bold leadership throughout my career, and all the things you just laid out. I mean, I benefited from every single bit of that. I made those mistakes. I was headed in the wrong direction on certain occasions, and bold leadership intervened one way or another to make sure that the desired outcome happened. I want to hit a couple things real quick, and then we're gonna shift on to part 2, which is, what are we doing about it? We have new leadership, obviously, from the president, the Pentagon, and Hegseth seems to be pretty engaged and driving forward in I think he sees a lot of the things you guys see. I want to take a minute to tell you about my book titled Elevate Your Leadership: How to Develop, Maintain, and Advance Lifelong Leadership. This book is based on my 26 years in U.S. Navy Special Operations and now 13 years in the private sector. Leadership is a perishable skill and a personal brand. In part 1, I guide you through building and applying your personal brand of leadership. Leadership also requires physical energy and mental clarity. In part 2, I go over the 6 key components of health and wellness and how you can apply these components every single day to become a great leader. This book is also breathable. What does that mean? It's 170 pages, 12-point font, with charts and graphs and pictures to break up the monotony of reading page after page. Finally, this book is available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and of course, RobertPizzini.com. Folks, I want to take a minute and talk about Breeden Construction. Breeden Construction built iFly Virginia Beach 10 years ago, and our building is solid. Why? Building a standard. Our standard is excellence. Visionary thinking, innovative design, dynamic solutions, and transformative growth. While others may see lofty ideals, we see the very foundation needed to construct a better future. This isn't just a promise we make to you, it's the standard we uphold. This is Breeden Construction. Learn more at breedenconstruction.com. Headquartered in Virginia with offices throughout Virginia and North Carolina, you can contact Breeden Construction directly at area code 804-364-4600. Breeden Construction, a national general contractor. But I want to we talk about what kind of people are coming into the military, right? And so there's this thing going around on Facebook, and it's a quote from Trey Gowdy. He's a talking head on Fox, and he's a super knowledgeable guy, and everything he says, the guy he researches and he knows what he's talking about. But for a guy who wasn't in the military, as far as I know, he wasn't. What he said was just magnificent and so key to this discussion. And I'm just going to read it. So Gowdy said a few things about the military in response to a stupid question from a CNN reporter. Oh, that never happened. About the ban of
what an aberration.
Yeah, about the ban of transgenders. He nails it. Nobody has a right to serve in the military. Nobody. What makes people think the military is an equal opportunity employer? Very far from it. The military uses prejudice regularly and consistently to deny citizens from joining for being too old or too young or too fat or too skinny or too tall or too short. Citizens are denied for having flat feet or for missing or having additional fingers. Poor eyesight will disqualify you. I got a whole story about poor eyesight. It's in the book.
By the book.
Poor eyesight will disqualify you, as well as bad teeth, malnourished, drug addiction, bad back, criminal history, low IQ, anxiety, phobias, hearing damage, 6 arms, hearing voices in your head. I actually had a dive school partner, a roommate, who he heard voices and he had these dreams, and he self-dropped from dive school. He's like, I'm afraid because of these dreams I'm having and the voices that I'm hearing, like I'm gonna,
Good for him.
like I'm gonna
Pretty sure that's
attack
schizophrenia.
and hurt one of my teammates.
By
Exactly.
the way,
for
according
sure.
to the Stripes article I was talking with you about pre-show, I think schizophrenia is waivable now. So,
Yeah, well, that's
and you
crazy.
guys that are out there on the corner yelling at
yeah,
yelling at the aliens,
Hire that guy.
welcome.
That's crazy. Gowdy goes on to say, if you self-identify as a unicorn, if you need a special access ramp for your wheelchair, you can't run the required course in the required time, can't do the required number of push-ups, not really a morning person, and refuse to get out of bed before noon, all can be reasons for denial in the U.S. military. I mean, it makes perfect sense. The military has one job: war. Anything else is a distraction and a liability. Did someone just scream, that isn't fair? War is very unfair. I've been to war. You guys have been to war. War is unfair. War doesn't care about any of these things. War will kill you in a second if you're not as prepared as you can be.
Even
then,
if you are.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, oftentimes, unfortunately. There are no exceptions for being special or challenged or socially wonderful. You change yourself to meet military standards, and that's what you guys were talking about earlier, Matt. You were saying, we're going to break that person down and rebuild them, and that's certainly the way we do it in special operations.
Not anymore though.
Yeah. Well,
Well, for you guys still. For
less and less, which is the theme of this
less
whole
and less.
discussion.
Yeah.
I say again, you don't change the military, you must change yourself. The military doesn't need to accommodate anyone with special issues. The military needs to win wars. Once again, this is attributed to Trey Gowdy. And so that's really what we've been talking about.
Yeah, and he's right. It turns out that combat is the standard bearer, right, for military entry requirements.
Yeah.
And we've learned those standards
The hard way.
for a very long time
Mhm.
as a country, and just over the course of human history, we've learned that. And for some reason, the past probably 20 years, we've gone the complete opposite direction, and increasingly so up until the latest election, seems.
Yeah. Well, so with the latest election, with Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, any opening observations or comments there in terms of, any effect on the military?
Yeah, I think in general, having served under many different presidents, I found working under Obama to be very linear, or I'm sorry, vanilla. I guess I should say it was very like Bush to Obama. There wasn't a huge difference. That was, everyone made a big deal about when Obama got elected, and then didn't seem like a ton of stuff changed overall. And then Trump, and it seemed like we got after it pretty aggressively under Trump for certain things, but maybe not so much for others. But he definitely inserted himself a little bit more. See a lot of those cases where he jumped into the military judicial process and helped tip the scales, and some of those you can argue that sort of separately. And then Biden comes along, and it was from my perspective as a military guy, when I was actually out on deployment when the transition happened. And it was basically all stop. We're going to stop everything that Trump had us doing. And if it was Trump's idea, it was a bad idea. And the result of that was effectively we still had guys outside the wire doing stuff, but we weren't allowed to protect them in a proactive manner. You basically had to wait to get shot at, and then you had to get approval from way up high to the point where it was so cumbersome that you would never get approval, and we all knew that. And that was sort of that was the culture. And then I think this was where a lot of that DEI sort of stuff went into full overdrive. We've been going that direction for a while. The sort of bureaucratic state that became ran the military. It caused, it started permeating, but it went into overdrive once President Biden got elected and Secretary Austin was in charge. It was just, the focus was not combat, right? And that was evidenced by the fact
the
that
focus was social issues.
yeah,
DEI.
President Biden and Secretary Austin both said that climate change was one of the big focuses of the DoD. Why in God's name is the DoD worried about climate change?
For
We're
sure.
supposed to be
And also,
killing.
what are we supposed to do about it?
Yeah, right.
We're supposed to be killing bad guys and breaking their stuff.
That's right.
Not worried about how much carbon footprint my F-18 has. I'll give you a hint. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But that was the focus. And when it's publicly
Purchase
said,
offsets.
when it's
Yeah.
publicly said that that's one of our focuses, it sends a message to everybody in the military that, hey,
It means we're not serious.
we're not that serious. But it
Yep.
also sends a message to our enemies that we're not that serious. And I think that's a huge problem.
And that message has been received by Putin, by Iran, by
Absolutely.
China, for sure.
And we see the results of that throughout the globe.
We re-messaged it with that pull out of Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
pullout of Afghanistan was an absolute disaster, unmitigated. You can throw the blame around however you want. It doesn't matter. The blame ends up on the U.S., unfortunately. And we look really, really bad there. And I think we're going to pay that price for a long time,
Down the road,
unfortunately. But you get the election happens, and Secretary Hegseth said a lot of things initially that I was like, that sounds right. I think he comes at it from a very, common sense, more tactical perspective because he was
He was a boots on the ground guy.
he's a boots on the ground
Yeah.
guy, right? He's a major, right? And
Yeah, the things that you're talking about, Hans, initially are the things he experienced.
absolutely. He said, hey, we are focused on war fighting. We're focused on lethality, and we are focused on the fitness required, both physical fitness, unit fitness, et cetera, that allows us to do
combat
those jobs
readiness
better. And I think that's a huge breath of fresh air. And you add that to all the things that Trump said, and we even saw a big bump in recruiting as soon as Trump got elected and Hegseth, right? So I think those are all good
Why
things.
is that though? It's because they're offering a different vision. That they're like, and I have my problems with Hegseth in certain ways, but because I think he lacks managerial experience, and that's why he's
my big
struggling
concern.
significantly right now because he's
struggling. Well, first of all, I don't think whatever the struggle is, it's reported times 100 in the press.
for sure. But,
100
like, there's-
negative, 100% negative press coverage
Right.
on any media outlet other than Fox.
So it's really difficult to tell. But
Yeah.
I can tell you that the leap from going from a major to the
yeah.
to the Secretary of Defense is a monstrous leap.
Oh, it's
The
a
thing-
monstrous
the-
leap.
The thing that he's very good at, he's very good at communicating his vision, and his vision is combat readiness, lethality, and fitness, and that alone is going to drive a better culture.
Yeah,
which
and
is
meritocracy.
why and
Mhm.
meritocracy, which is why the people that would ordinarily be interested in joining the military, but for the past, I don't know, decade or so haven't been,
Yeah.
they're now coming back to that idea of this as an option because because they see that they can challenge themselves and find kind of the deep meaning of their life through achievement and
Yeah.
belonging to something bigger than them because the proper message and vision has been related to them. This is what we're about. And so people are
For
turning
sure.
around and going, oh, this interests me now.
Yeah.
And they're willing to sacrifice to get it. Like the problem that Hegseth is going to face is that, just like we referenced earlier, with a significant decrease in actual, existential threat to our military and our nation, we've had a lot of managers come up through the ranks.
Yeah. What do you mean decrease in? When you say existential, you mean?
So, I'm not minimizing the threat of extremism and
Or China and Iran.
what I'm saying is until recently we have not had a significant peer-to-peer threat, right? And so what
I would say we have. It just hasn't been. That goes
Hasn't
back
been
to
kinetic.
the Obama. Hey, what do you say? Russia called. They want their Cold War back or
Right.
whatever.
So
it never went away.
It's not that it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist to the degree of like erasure of our way of life necessarily until relatively recently. And so
On the recruiting thing, let me hit the recruiting thing
Yeah.
real quick. So I know, like within my business, I have 40 people on the iFly Virginia Beach team. Probably 95% of the people on this team came from referrals from people who are already on the team.
it's a great way to do it.
It's a great way to do it. And it's no different in the U.S. military. I remember when I came in, my best friend's older brother, he's a couple years older than us. He joined the Navy. And so like my senior year of high school, I kept hearing about, Jim Carraway and joined the Navy and, this and that. And he'd show up in his dress blues. And this is somebody who was happy with his, the beginning of his career in the military. And that had a lot of influence on my thinking as well. And so that's going to happen more and more as well as we have
Sure.
people staying in and they're happy. That's going to influence recruiting as much as, the broader messaging.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that's great. And like the reason that's happening, I think, is because we've changed the messaging
From the top.
from the top. The problem that I think Hegseth and anybody who's trying to execute his and the president's objectives are going to face is that we have so many managers that have not leaders, managers
Mhm.
that have grown up in this this managerial type of culture.
Yeah, bureaucracy.
So the bureaucracy, they're beings of the bureaucracy, right? And so now they occupy all sorts of different places within the DoD, and he's trying to turn a giant ship around, and it's not really easy when you have a bunch of people whose kind of bureaucratic rice bowl
For sure.
and
For sure.
bureaucratic ethos is now under threat.
Yeah,
Like,
he's got his own deep state within the military.
Yeah.
yeah,
You know?
and he's
But
also
he's addressing it. He's firing people right and left. And I don't know the ins and outs of the details, but I do know that, if you're not towing the line, you're gone.
Yeah, I think that, it sounds like, and I don't know enough about the ins and outs of the politics to really get into that, but I would say that I think he's going to face continued struggle because I don't necessarily know that he has had the managerial experience. This is my guess, that he's had the managerial experience to execute on his own. So he's relying on other people to help him with the managerial stuff.
Smart.
Which
That's
is smart, right? Because you got to task shed to people.
Yeah.
But like, if those people that are good at management also, but they don't share your vision, you're going to have people paddling against, the turn.
For sure. And that's ever present. That's there's not a perfect, system where everybody's going to align and get on board. And, he's a new young kid, if you will, in a system of old gray-haired bureaucratic
That never get fired.
that never get fired.
Reference Afghanistan.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of Hegseth's points is, I forget the exact numbers, but we grew from this limited number of admirals and generals, especially like during World War II when we're
Yeah.
fighting on two fronts, to like 10 or 20 times.
It's like 600 that was like the last I checked, which might have been years ago.
Yeah.
But how many GOFO, that's General Officer Flag Officer acronym, forgive us for having so many acronyms in aviation / the military. Like the amount of GOFO level star and above flag and general officers is shocking, and it's unnecessary. Not only does it cost us a ton of money because we're all paying those people, but like it is why do we, you're also taking any sort of leadership ability away from lower.
Yeah.
Like you're not delegating that leadership.
Boom.
It all ends
We
up.
just identified the thesis of this whole discussion: a less elite military because of administrivia. What'd you call it?
Yeah, administrivia.
Yeah,
but then we
administritis.
labeled it, yeah, administritis. Yeah.
Yeah. So because all this bloat of GOFOs of general,
It's
and
all their
flag-
fault. Yeah.
Yeah, because they got to justify their jobs.
Well, and it's
So they come up-
I don't
paradoxical.
think it's I don't
It's a
think
paradox though,
necessarily
right?
their
Because
fault,
like we
but-
say we've become less elite, yet by the rank structure we're clearly more elite than we used to be, right?
Yeah.
Like we have
Well, yeah, you
Well,
know,
there's only so many warfighters. They got to justify their existence in other ways.
you
and-
experience this. We experience this, especially with like the strikes and stuff like that. Like delegation of leadership was, especially in the New Age Iraq and Afghanistan, the later versions of those wars, was much, much higher. And so to get anything done kinetically, you had to reach from the tactical, guy in the ground leader up multiple levels to get
all the way to the strategic. You had strategic leaders making tactical decisions, which makes for a very
it's terrible. That's micromanagement.
Very unagile, ineffective military.
Yeah, that's micromanagement at its absolute worst.
So I think I am optimistic. I hope
Vietnam is an example.
Yeah. I hope that Secretary Hegseth can find his way to competency in the managerial side, because I think his vision is the proper orientation for our military.
Yeah. Lethality, combat effectiveness, meritocracy.
Yeah, it turns out that in order to be a good military, you have to be good at killing people and breaking their stuff. Whoa, wow, that's such
like to say blow
what a
things
wild,
up.
What a wild concept.
The EOD guys that like to say blow stuff up. Yeah,
his orientation is the correct one, and I think that's the proper vision for the military, and I think it's proving so because it sounds like recruiting numbers are up. Time will tell
for sure. Recruiting and retention. The time will tell. Retention's a big thing too.
Yep.
And again, within the Navy Special Operations, I see and hear these discussions pretty regularly. So I've got my ear wide open for that. The other thing, Hegseth, and really any politician, anybody who becomes prominent, no matter what your job is inside or outside of the military, you have haters. And it's really a requirement to be successful. You have to have haters. And so he has to spend, and he knew this going into it, he spends probably 25, 35, 45% of his time combating haters, right? He has to fight against a deep state that was committed to fighting against him the day he was named to be the Secretary of Defense, and a big part of that is the press and the media, and all the what's the word I'm looking for? The media is its own intelligence agency. It's its own espionage agency is what it is. So the media immediately created an espionage campaign against him that will last the rest of his life, certainly while he's in public life. And so he recognized that, and he has to spend a lot of time and a lot of resource combating that. Unfortunately, that's just part of the job, especially when you work for President Trump.
Yeah, and you have unfortunately you have a media that is 100%, the statistic 100% negative stories.
Yep.
That's hard to combat. But then you also have a lot of people within the larger, I would say, Pentagon apparatus that who moved my cheese kind of thing. There's a plug for another book, right? But they don't want things to change, and that I'm including government civilians within that, because our DoD is filled with a lot of really great government civilians, but there's also a lot of ones that don't. Yeah. As reference Hans's earlier statement, their job is to say no more than it is to say yes. We don't want to get to yes because that just means more work. Right?
Yeah, right.
But you also have a bunch of folks
doged.
Yeah, exactly. But you have a bunch of folks, military and otherwise, that don't share the same vision. They're happy with the way it was. They agree with a lot of the
therapeutic politics of it.
Yeah, and so they are going to fight within that organization to muck up, to mire all the progress that is attempting to be made. And there are a lot of people. Hans went to some training that was specifically oriented to DEI within the DoD and how to manage people, and that you should be able to see the diversity within your unit. Never mind the fact that so apparently the only thing we're worried about diversity wise is the color of your skin. That's outrageous. But that's said to me. That was said to me. Wow. There are people within the DoD that have jobs like that, and there's a lot of them, and they are going to be fighting tooth and nail against this new administration. And you add to that the headwinds of a compliant media. I think that's a lot of work, and we saw that with the first Trump administration, where they spent half their time defending themselves in court.
Yeah,
Which is a stark contrast to the Biden-Obama administrations that have near free reign. It's a lot easier to fight a ground war when you own the skies above.
Right.
And that's unfortunately
that's a great way to put it. Trump's first administration.
It's an insurgency.
Yeah,
he's an insurgent, and he is fighting a very entrenched enemy that owns the skies.
That's right. That's exactly
owns the water.
right.
The crazy thing is that like Matt and I are not very political creatures. We pay attention to it because it's where ideas come to the fore and become policy and stuff like that. And that's, I think, where it interests us. The crazy thing is that somehow this blows my mind every time I talk about it, but like somehow the idea of a military being oriented towards combat effectiveness, lethality, and fitness is controversial.
Yeah.
Like, what color is the sky in these people's worlds? Like, we obviously occupy different dimensions of reality because, like, it's mind-boggling that they find that to be a controversial statement and that they're actively fighting against it. But it goes to show you kind of how warped people's mentalities have gotten.
Yeah.
That the focus has shifted from that to this therapeutic, like, oh, everybody should feel good and welcome in the military. No, they shouldn't.
Yeah. Part of the problem is it's really the comfort level of living in America, and we don't have, other than a southern border that, there's not a military threat at the southern border. There's a threat there for sure with drugs and narcoterrorism and the volume of people that we're coming across. But
there's a military threat. It's just not kinetic right now.
Yeah, and it's so 99.9% of Americans don't see that, don't feel that, don't understand what that's like. And unless you live in some of the gang infested areas, maybe, or if you live on the periphery of a gang infested area. But so as America has become soft, they've accepted these lower standards for military service. And
your point of we've become soft is the exact, I think, the broader point for all of this, which is we have lost our relationship with risk. We to a large degree, America and even the military nowadays, because you can see it in like the overblown safety culture and stuff like that, is we do not negotiate risk very much on a daily basis. And because we don't negotiate with that risk, we tend to, it has warped our culture to a degree that we, like, our thoughts and our policies and stuff, we're so safe. We've created such a fantastically wealthy and safe and abundant culture, country, that we've lost our relationship with risk. And so our bad ideas don't have to regularly encounter reality because they're shielded from it. And so we can get down these crazy roads where people can just get really creative with these bonkers ideas, and they don't necessarily have to encounter reality until farther down the road. And so that's why you get these, what they call them, luxury beliefs and stuff. And
what's a luxury belief?
so luxury beliefs are like, I mean, if you want to get political with it, like luxury beliefs would be the idea that, biological males can grow their hair long, put on some makeup, and compete in women's sports, and there won't be any consequences.
Okay. So
stuff like that.
Yeah, kind of a Biden philosophy.
It's a panorama. I mean, like, yeah, but there's so many different ideas, but they're all bad ideas that a practical person would look at and go, what?
It's not even real.
This doesn't make any sense. But people can have these bad ideas
and
exchange them, and they don't have to meet with reality.
Yeah. Like, what is a woman? Like the question to Ketanji Jackson Brown, right? What is a woman? And of the 3 or 4 very crystal clear ways to define that, one, can have children, is built to
the
have
appropriate
children.
Equipment. Yes.
Yeah, has the appropriate equipment. So just, it can't even answer such a basic question. So.
It's terrifying. And but those luxury beliefs, I think, stem from a and it happens in the military too, which is why we're talking about it. Those stem from a lack of negotiation of risk, because risk will lean out your idiocy, right? You become much more practical of a person when you have to navigate risk, and the greater that risk becomes to your body, your brain, or whatever,
or your business,
the more practical you get.
Yeah.
And because we don't face that regularly, and we don't deal with it regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a public.
ideas.
That's the big contrast between the public and private sector, which I think, Trump and Doge in a lot of ways is trying to navigate. Like the public sector in the government agencies and stuff like that don't have to deal with this strict budget that a small business that you are very familiar with as a small business owner and a leader within the, right. You don't have the opportunity to create a culture that is heavily reliant on luxury ideas, right? Because if the luxury idea is bad, you're going to pay for it, and you might not have a business if you go too far down that road.
Exactly.
The public sector.
You'd love to hire all sorts of people, right? You'd love to hire all sorts of really great people and just give them a job and a living wage, quote unquote, right? That would just be a really nice thing for you to do.
Yeah.
Can you do that?
No, it's
Absolutely
meritocracy.
not.
It's you got to pull your weight. It's meritocracy, and a big part of what you pulling your weight around here is helping your teammates out.
Yeah, but that's
being
the
a great
practical.
teammate.
It's the practical application of a navigation of risk for you.
Yeah,
and you put that in perspective of the government that doesn't have to deal with these budget constraints. Look at the DoD that we haven't passed a budget analysis or audit, right, for was like a decade or something like that. That's outrageous. There is no small business that could ever survive on margins like that. Like that
for sure. For sure.
You just would never. It just doesn't work that way, right?
Not at
and
all.
yet in the public, in the government,
that's a big part of Trump's approach to government,
right? And in the government sector, we apparently can do that. But you look at that from the military perspective. Let's bring it back to sort of the microcosm we talked about before as an example, right? Like all this administrative burden that we had to do. Let's say the three of us are in combat operations with a near peer threat. Bob's going out the door to disable WMDs or any of that stuff. Like you're going out regularly. You're on deployment. You are regularly going out. You're getting shot at. We're getting shot at. We're doing missions, all the time. Do you think we have time to go do our information assurance training to make sure our government credit card training is up to date?
Compliant.
We gotta check that green box and send it out.
You don't have time because the combat requirement of just surviving and getting the mission done so you survive, right? Like just that personal micro perspective, and then you broaden that out to a larger military, a campaign, and in a whole war against an enemy that you are actively trying to defeat. You don't have time for all these other things. So to reference Hans's point, that risk, when you are confronted with real risk, it sheds all the other fat to the absolute leanest and most efficient organization that you can possibly be, or you're defeated. And then if you're a business, that means you go out of business. If you're a military and you can't trim that fat and learn and adapt to trim that fat and get lean and fight well, then you lose the mission, you lose the battle, you lose the war.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we're at right now. We are not in a position, we are so powerful, so safe. We are not in a position where we are in danger of losing a war. And so all these little creepy, insidious requirements just percolate to the top until we're fat, lazy,
it's
and
all those
sad,
extra generals and admirals
unfocused.
It's your fault.
They're not in charge of fighting wars. They're in charge of all this.
We're definitely not mad about not getting promoted.
There's a great historical example of this. I hope I get this right, and if I don't, then we'll have to edit it out. But the Brits were fighting a war in I want to say it was like deep South Africa, but I could be wrong on that. But they're fighting a war in Africa against this really aggressive tribe. I want to say it was the Zulus, but I don't quote me on that. But the way it went down was they had these wagons of ammunition, and the guys on the front line were running out of ammo, and so they're coming back to the wagons to get their ammunition, and they're getting like run down by this massive enemy force, and they're because the Brits are very into protocol, and like it seems like we're going this direction. This is what this is why this is so applicable, is the person managing the wagons of ammunition was forcing them to fill out their requisitions for ammunition.
So they can keep track of it.
So they could keep track of it instead of just going like, grab it.
Yeah.
We're all going to die if you don't grab it.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, nope, get in line
Yeah,
and also
get in
fill out
line
this requisition.
and dodge bullets while you're doing
They
that.
died, but at least they had the
Yeah.
paperwork straight.
You know,
Exactly.
but that kind of reminds me, when I was in Iraq, I was on a Green Beret team. I was the only EOD tech on the team, and I needed explosives for a variety of things, right? And so in the States, at any unit in the States, when you need explosives, you fill out 37 pieces of paper. There's an inventory inside the magazine. Okay, this crate, this box has got 100 pounds of C4. You're going to take 9 pounds out, then that's going to leave 91 pounds, and we're going to account for that. And here's 9 pieces of paper and magnetic seals and all the other stuff to account for it. When I was in Iraq, I needed 200 pounds of C4 for a mission. A helicopter showed up out of nowhere, was on the ground for 5 seconds. The guy inside kicks a crate out. I got 200 pounds of C4 at my disposal. Helicopter takes off, and it's like, go do your job.
Yeah.
So
Because you had risk to mitigate.
Yeah.
It's not, and just for the public to reassure them, like we're not advocating that we go just totally cowboy on all this stuff. Like regulations, rules, all those kind of things are necessary. What we're saying is that this has gone far too far.
Yeah.
It's just we've gone to plaid.
Yeah.
Spaceballs quote there.
All right, guys. Hey, we're going to wrap this one up. This is the first of what's going to become a regular. I don't know if it's going to be monthly, every other month, because 2 commercial pilots, hockey players, and I travel quite a bit. So we're going to get together as often as we can, and it makes sense. And we have super cool, pithy stuff to discuss.
Witty.
So as we get ready to sign off, any parting comments? Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, Bob, thanks for having us. This has been an awesome opportunity to spout my mouth off a little bit. And I think, hopefully we stumble on some universal truths for a lot of folks, but we're also saying things that, particularly our military, but also the private sector can hear and go, you know what, that resonates with me. Here's how I'm going to take that, mold it into, not only my leadership, but also the culture I'm trying to create. You and I we've talked extensively on culture and how to make that a positive force within your unit. And hopefully we, throughout these discussions can, these folks listening can go, hey, I'm going to roll that into my culture and find goodness in that and take your unit, your business, your team to the next level. That's what I hope to get out of this. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, it's fun. Hansi.
Bob, I'd just like to echo the thanks. This has been so cool. Our first time doing a real podcast.
Yeah.
With a professional such as yourself.
Yeah,
So.
I'll probably release it.
Yeah. Oh, God. Terrifying.
Wait, has this been on record the entire time?
I thought this was just a scent microphone. No, it's been. I think that just like Maddie said, the goal is to some degree just create a conversation for ourselves to exercise our thoughts, but hopefully that conversation spreads into the wider community and and people get something out of us that they can take to their friends and their colleagues and grow the discussion.
Yeah,
because that's how we all learn.
Yeah, that's right. You could be a parent, advising your child. You could be a owner or leader of an organization and advising your employees. I mean, there's so many ways to apply everything we talked about. All right, last little tidbit here. I know you both went to University of St. Louis, right?
St. Louis University.
St. Louis University. Okay. So St. Louis Blues in the playoffs. Are you guys tracking what happened last night?
Yeah, that was wild. I actually turned
Me
off
too.
the game. I was like, 3-1. This is whatever. I'm going to go to bed now.
Absolutely unbelievable.
2 empty netters, one with 1.4 seconds left or something like that.
That is compelling television.
And then
It's great for hockey. I mean, it's entertaining.
And then to go on and win. I mean, that was Game 7.
Yeah.
That's about as compelling of a hocky series as you can get.
At the end of second
to the
overtime,
Blues,
too.
they didn't roll over like after they lost the lead. They came out. They had some chances in overtime.
Yeah,
but,
2 overtimes right before.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Double OT.
Wow. All right. Hey, great discussion. Thanks, folks. Remember, elevate your leadership. You can learn more about my offerings at robertpizzini.com. That's Robert, Pizzini. We'll see you next time.
Buy the book.
Buy the book.
Thank you for listening to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast. To contact Bob directly or to learn more about how Bob can advance you and your organization through leadership training, team building, executive coaching, and public speaking, visit robertpizzini.com. Robert, Pizzini.com, and connect with him on LinkedIn.